GHRT Rewinds are brought to you by Laughlin and Wolfington Realty. Mike and Nate and Harrison teaming up to help you sell your home faster and for top dollar. This is the George Hill, Rick Tyler Show, dialing long distance. I guess you don't really think about that too much these days, do you? We just pick up the PD Cudor telephone line, dialing in from Bridgeton this morning. It's Ken Quinn. We know him from our discussions concerning the idea of a convention of states, and we'll get into it now. Hey, Ken, welcome back to GHRT.
Good morning, Rick. Good morning, George. How are you guys this morning?
Well,
we survived another snowstorm.
Yeah.
Enough of that.
Armageddon came and went.
Mm-hmm. Hey,
well, listen, I want to brag this morning because Bridgeton, I was watching the news, and we came in number one with the highest snow total. We hit a foot. So just a little bit of bragging rights there.
You can have it. Look, last we talked with you, and you've given us, reminded us of what is in the United States Constitution. If the people of the United States, if each state doesn't like what Washington, D.C. is doing, you can get enough of them to say yes, and you can convene what's called a convention of states. Before we go any further in our conversation, remind our listeners what that would entail, what that means.
Yeah, exactly. And your theme song, "We're going to take the power back," boy, really fits Article 5. And basically, this is a mechanism that the framers gave us to propose amendments, the same authority that Congress has. And the reason the framers put it into the Constitution was exactly where we find ourselves today. If we find the federal government is abusing its powers, that the mechanism to fix that and make the necessary corrections is to have the states hold a meeting to propose solutions. And then what happens is each state will get one vote. If any of those solutions, or what they're called amendments, if they pass, then they go back to all of the 50 states, and it will take 38 of them to ratify it before it becomes part of the U.S. Constitution. So that's what we're trying to do here in Maine with HP1232. And we're seeking a meeting of the states just to propose one simple amendment, which is term limits on the members of Congress.
The framers of the Constitution put that in the Article 5, but he also made it a very high bar. So you don't want to do it willy-nilly. This is an exceedingly high threshold that you have to get to, right?
Yeah, it's a very high bar. When you talk about willy-nilly, just to give you a little comparison, Congress has introduced 12,000 amendments to the U.S. Constitution under Article 5. The states have introduced 0. And so this is a very high bar for an amendment to get completely ratified, but we need the states to step up and at least get in the game and offer some solutions which are desperately needed for our country today.
So this one would seek to put a term limit on Congress. Senate, House, both?
Yeah, both. And we're not we're not writing what those terms would be. That would be something that would be discussed and debated at the convention. Now, currently in Congress right now, there's 2 resolutions in the Senate and the House, and those proposed amendments, are for 2 terms. It had 5 provisions in it. Guess what the first provision was? The first provision was, to direct the state legislature to apply for an Article 5 convention to propose a term limit amendment on Congress. That, I think, is amazing, and that passed with a 59% of the vote of the Maine people.
We're talking with Ken Quinn concerning convention of states. If enough states get together, they can, and they have the right under the Constitution of the United States of America to tell Congress what it needs to address. And in this case, it would be congressional term limits. So you brought the matter up before lawmakers here in Maine. How did that go?
Yeah, we had the public hearing yesterday in front of the Committee on State and Local Government, and it went very well. I thought I was asked some really good questions by the members. We thought they were going to vote on it yesterday, but they didn't, which is good because that gives our supporters and hopefully the people listening to this more time to contact not only the members of the committee but their own state legislators to support this. What I'm finding, and it kind of breaks my heart, is that what's stopping this is this fear that state legislators have of a meeting. And it's, they're concerned we're going to lose our civil rights and, this and that. But it's like, folks, listen, we're losing our civil rights on a daily basis. Just look at this memo that came out in our Fourth Amendment rights. We're losing, our Second Amendments are being infringed upon day after day. The federal government, Congress, and through regulations, we are losing our freedoms. And the very tool that the framers gave us when this was to happen, they are afraid to use. And so I'm looking for more leaders like Representative Nathan Wadsworth, our sponsor, and our co-sponsor, Representative Stephen Stanley, who are not fearful, but they're fearless, and they're using the authority given to state legislators under Article 5 to use whenever they feel or our rights are being threatened by the federal government. This is exactly why the framers gave this to us.
Who was the first guy? Who was the first sponsor? Not Stephen Stanley.
Nathan Wadsworth out of Hiram.
Democrat or Republican?
He's a Republican, and Stephen Stanley is a Democrat.
So we use the GHRT air quotes, bipartisan, as we like to say.
So we'd like a term limits amendment. Some people would to have to go to the states for ratification. Am I being a little naive here just to believe that Congress is likely to limit itself voluntarily?
Oh, no, they're not going to. That's why we have to do this, because it's only going to come from the states. Congress has introduced 150 term limit amendments since 1950 or so. They never gain any traction. It's just lip service to the American people. If we really want to clean up house, the only way to get it done is through the states, because it completely bypasses Congress. You know, there's a great quote by Dwight Eisenhower in regards to this, and he said, quote, "Through their state legislatures and without regard to the federal government, the people can demand a convention to propose amendments that can and will reverse any trends they see as fatal to true representative government," unquote. And that's exactly why the framers gave us this option. And, you know, can you imagine if we had George Washington and James Madison come back today to see how things were going? You know, how did we handle the government they gave us? And we complained about what was happening in Washington, D.C., and we went through all the problems. And then they asked us, well, did you use the tool we gave you for exactly this problem? And then we would sheepishly look at them and say, well, no, we were too scared to have a meeting.
Clarify something for us. Just because enough states stand up and says to Congress, you must address this issue, it's not telling Congress they have to pass this issue, is it?
This is designed and put in there they can be 100% against it, and they're going to be. It doesn't matter. They cannot interfere with this process because this is only controlled from start to finish by the states. The states meet, the states propose, the states pass an amendment, and the states ratify. And this was put into the Constitution without regards to the consent of the national government, and that's why we have this option. And today, it's time to finally use what our framers gave us.
If I ask some questions that probably aren't too smart, it'd be normal for me, but I haven't spent a lot of time looking at this, frankly. But one of the things I've read a number of times is that the opponents, I'm going to put this in quotes, are worried that a runaway convention would do irreparable harm to our Constitution, which has served us for over 200 years.
You mean they're going to start taking up topics other than the one that they said that they were going to take up?
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and that came up yesterday, and that's that fear. You know, the myth of a runaway convention is actually the reality of our runaway federal government. So it's already happened. We're facing it every day. But this whole myth is based on nothing but a lie. It's a lie about how the original convention was called and how it operated. And unfortunately, people are buying into this lie. And it's really shameful because it really defames the framers, who are honorable men. And basically what they claim is they gave us an illegal constitution. So today we have an illegal constitution because these men violated their commissions. Complete and utter lie. And so, unfortunately, that has been propagated by the extremists on both the left and the right for decades in order to maintain the status quo and to protect the establishment. And so, it's time. You know, we might as well expunge the first three words out of the Constitution. We, the people, cross it out if we're too afraid to actually use it. And let's just put in we, the federal government, and let's just call it a day. Because unless we actually use the very document that we claim we love and want to protect, then you're being a hypocrite.
All right, help me out with just one follow-up quickly. The Constitution provides for a convention for proposing amendments. not to change the Constitution. Is that right? The convention would have...
Well, it goes back to my question.
Yeah.
You can propose it, but who
Right.
says it's going to be made into...
It's not a trivial question, really. It's what did they intend? What did the framers intend?
And this is where the fear mongering and the misunderstanding. People will call this a constitutional convention. Well, it's not, because immediately after the framers voted on the wording of Article 5, a motion was made to give Article 5 the same powers as the Constitutional Convention, and they defeated that motion. They only wanted to propose amendments. And so I'm glad you brought that up, George, because this is not a constitutional convention. The process for a constitutional convention, which is to rewrite a new constitution, is completely different than what's found in Article 5. It takes unanimous consent to call, to pass, and to ratify a brand new constitution amongst the states. Article 5, to propose an amendment, it only takes 2/3 to call, a majority to pass, and 3/4 to ratify, and then it binds all the states. But it's only a proposal. The convention can only make a recommendation, which then needs to go back, and like you said, it's a very high bar. It will take 38 states, 38, to ratify it before it is part of the Constitution.
Well, there may not be a runaway convention should the Convention of States get together. You got to stick to the topic at hand, as we like to say. But it could create kind of a precedent where the states realize, you know what? We do have the power to do this. We do have the power to get together and tell D.C. what to do. And it could lead to additional conventions of state years ahead.
Exactly. And that's why I am such a believer, and I'm dedicating my life to this, because all we have to prove one time is that the process works. And then the American people are going to realize, you know what? We can turn this thing around ourselves and demand, okay, now we want to address this spending issue. Now we want to address, whatever these concerns are. This is the very mechanism that we can use. And I guarantee you, once we're successful with the very first convention, this is going to be a game changer for protecting and restoring our Constitution the way the framers intended. And we'll stop having this abuse by those in Washington, D.C. And basically what I said in my testimony yesterday is that the states are the parents of the federal government. They created it. And we've got a unruly child in Washington, and what does a good parent do when their child's unruly? They correct it. And so this is exactly what a good parent would do, is use their authority to correct the problem. And that's all we're seeking. We need state legislators here in Maine to get behind this, stand up for us. The people of Maine are not afraid of this. Over 2/3 of the people of Maine want this, and they want it through this process. What we're finding is so many of the legislators are afraid to use it, and it's just shameful. It's really sad. So let's buck up, people, and get this done for the people of Maine and for our nation.
Well,
GHRT Rewinds, brought to you by your hometown real estate team, Laughlin and Wolfington Realty. Thinking about selling your home? Call 629-9211 and start packing.